I, wanted to be an entrepreneur and to start my own platform.
Okay.
There were very few fund managers who were starting their own platform. Forget women fund managers starting their platform. We have portfolio companies where, they have hired senior people or they want to hire senior people. It comes to the board. And I asked the question as to who all were considered, and I look at the names and they're all men, and I say, do the search again, or at least consider women. Being one of the few women-founded GPs with local institutions, I think pioneering the whole domestic ecosystem in the country, getting the local ecosystem convinced about private equity in the early days. That wasn't the norm. A woman starting a private equity fund in 2011 was not the norm. So I think I'm finding it hard to think of ways in which I followed the norm.
Thanks, Shivani, for being on the show with us. It's all about women who have wiped out the norm, and you've been one of the forefront leaders in fund management space because you launched your fund in 2011 at a time when the word fund was also not known as much, and you've seen all cycles of fund getting evolved into the Indian landscape and startup founders getting bigger and bigger with supporters like yourself. So tell me as to what triggered you to start your own fund, because you had a stellar journey in other funds. In the US, you worked for about 14 years. So what was it that made you come back to India and start a fund specifically for India?
So Radhika, first a huge round of applause to you for actually taking the initiative for getting women like me on your network, on your ecosystem. It's really wonderful, and hats off to you for doing that. Okay, so yes, you're right. I lived in the US for 14 years, and one day I said, okay, I've had tremendous experience here. I've got my education here. I did my undergraduate at a small liberal arts school called Mount Holyoke. I got my MBA from Wharton. Started my journey on Wall Street. I worked at PE funds. But the tug of India was sort of gnawing at me for a few years prior. And finally I said, you know what, let me try this and let me see how it goes. I moved to India. Of course, I had, opportunities at some of the large US funds when I moved. But I specifically wanted I wanted freedom, flexibility, and I wanted a platform where I shared the value system and the ethos. And I actually joined Louis Miranda, who is my boss here, wonderful guy, at IDFC Private Equity. However, I felt that as I was there, I realized that there was a very big gap in the market, in the mid-market. So there were homegrown funds and there were large international funds that had become very large. And there were early stage, angel funds. But this in-between stage was very exciting. There's a very wide space. By the way, it's still very exciting. And I said, let me explore this and see, if there's something that can be done here. When I was 5 months pregnant, someone said, hey Shivani, you keep talking about this mid-market thing. Go meet this person, and he is looking around to sort of, invest in a startup fund. So I just went, just like I'm sitting here and having a cup of coffee very naturally with you. I went and met this gentleman, and he was a proper businessman. He was the promoter of a financial services firm. His name shall remain unsaid, but I met him. And I told him my vision. I told him, I said there was a white space. It was very exciting. I told him that my background in the US was all mid-market investing, so it lent itself very naturally to start and to lead a fund like this. And he turned around and said, I'm really excited. I'm very convinced, and I would like to back you. And he threw out a number which I thought I'd heard wrong, so I had to ask him again.
Was it too big or too less?
Too big. And then, of course, had I been a man, I would have jumped across the table, shook his hand and said, thank you. But I'm a woman. So I turned around and said, wait, but there's something you must know. I'm 5 months pregnant. And he turned around and said, congratulations. And he went back to the pitch book. So I was wondering, I said, did he hear me right? He definitely heard me. I'm quite loud, as you can see.
That's usually the reverse, you know.
Exactly. And then I went home and I met my husband and I said, I had a very crazy day. This is what happened. And I told him the story, and he said, I want to back you. And he said, and when I said I'm 5 months pregnant, he said, congratulations.
Yeah.
And my husband turned around and said, okay, great, congratulations. So I said, if all these men around me are saying congratulations,
Yeah.
means it's possible, right?
Correct.
And so I said, I'm going to try. What's the worst that'll happen?
Yeah.
It won't succeed, and then I'll join some other platform. I'll figure something else out, right? From 2000 to 11 to 14 was a very startup period for India Alternatives. It was me knocking on a bunch of doors, very sequentially, pleading, persuading, convincing, begging. And it was, you convince that one bank, then they would, say, okay, fine, just don't come here anymore. I'll give you something, stop coming.
Oh my God.
But it was a lot of that. Then in 2014 we became quite stable, and from 2014 the journey has been the different challenges as you grow in scale, but from 2014 we've been stable, and we've been moving ahead.
You said that your board of advisor really helped you initially to open doors. So can you tell me how did you meet that person, and
actually,
if it's okay to disclose the name?
Absolutely. So I'll disclose the name. This is a woman called Ranjana Kumar, who is phenomenal. So she was one of the first women to become the chairperson of a public sector bank in India.
Which one?
She was the chairperson of Indian Bank.
Okay.
Yeah, and she turned it around. And she was also the first woman vigilance commissioner in the country.
Wow.
So in that role, she is responsible to prevent fraud in any of the public sector undertakings. Very tough lady. And I, when I came back to India, and the goal was to raise money from, local institutions, I spoke to a whole bunch of people. Her name came up. But she sat on the board of, the Tatas and this and that. And here I was a complete startup. But I met her several times and sort of, convinced her. The first few times she said, oh, this is sounding very nice what you're doing, very sweet, but I'm not interested. But over time I think we developed a rapport, and she started getting confidence in what I was doing and what I was building, and she finally agreed to come on board, and she sort of helped make a few introductions in the early days, and then of course it was about closing those things, right? So people can make introductions, but you have to go out and you have to close it.
Correct.
And then it was very sequential.
Do you remember how did you reach out to her firstly? Was it a cold email, LinkedIn reach out, through a person?
I tried through somebody.
Okay.
I tried connecting through somebody, so I did get a meeting, so it wasn't completely cold. But I do recall that it took several meetings to convince her. And finally, and she wasn't giving me a meeting, but finally she happened, I think one of her flight was delayed back to Hyderabad or something like this. So she had some time to kill in the airport. So she said, if you can come and meet me near the airport, then I'll meet you for half an hour. So that was how I first met her.
You must have really thanked the airport authority
I did, and I share, like I said, I share your tenacity and persistence, so I think that helps.
Right. But your portfolio now looks full of people who have been well established in their businesses. But there is one woman that stood out to me, Padmaja from NSDL, that you supported. So how did that happen? How did you choose to invest in her?
So to be honest, we had already invested in NSDL, and we knew Padmaja before now. We are very, very familiar with the entire ecosystem. So we were very excited when she came and she became the CEO of NSDL. And a lot of the companies that we back are mid-market when we invest in them, and subsequently become very established. So I'm very proud when people say, we looked at your portfolio, it looks all established, because trust me, it wasn't like that when we invested in them. Not all of them were super established. But Padmaja stands out. I think having women investors, and I'm sure you have, doing such amazing work as you do, I'm sure you have done the research on seeing how women fund managers and, actually spur the ecosystem of getting more women leadership at the top in portfolio companies, right? And what we found is that we would love to back phenomenal companies backed by women founders, but even if that's not the case today, we can sit and say, hey, even in our portfolio, are there women that can rise to the top like a Padmaja? Are there women that can actually go from being mid-level to very senior level positions to the CXO role? And how do we support them in that journey? How do we equip them? So as you know, we do a lot of activities, to kind of inspire confidence, to support women, to getting there, because we find that a lot of times men and women at a certain level, the man will be very overconfident, right? And will say that he possibly knows more than he does.
Yeah.
And the woman will hold herself back, and she may know a lot, but she will say, listen, wait a minute, I'm not totally sure.
Yeah.
Because women tend to be perfectionists. I'm generalizing here, of course.
Yeah.
So then if you inspire them, if you equip them with skills, most of the time they already know their stuff.
Correct.
But they just need that last, push
Yeah.
to get them there.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And like you said that when there are leaders on top, they can make this change happen.
Yes.
Like, for example, you're leading the fund. That's how you
Correct.
can see that, okay, in your portfolio companies, this is a rising star who I can make a leader in the business.
Exactly.
Because usually it's not taken care of.
Exactly.
Generally.
Absolutely. I mean, and we have portfolio companies where, they have hired senior people, or they want to hire senior people. It comes to the board, and I ask the question as to who all were considered. And I look at the names, and they're all men, and I say, do the search again.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least consider women,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So
But why do you think this unconscious gender bias still exists, where people don't even think about considering women for the leadership level roles?
I think it's unconscious. As you said, it's unconscious. I think it's also a lot of times it's just familiarity, right? You just want to hire more people who look and are like you.
Correct. There's a familiarity bias
bias also, right? And then it's just easy. I mean, frankly, people are so busy. So you need to push.
Yeah,
you need to push to make that change.
I saw that you took an exit from Enamor in 2019.
Yes.
So could you tell us the story of how you happened to find the founder, invest into them, and plan an exit?
Absolutely. So Enamor was a very, very exciting story. So I don't know how much you know about our fund thesis, but one of our fund, investment thesis is women-oriented consumption, right? And we find that this is a massive opportunity. It's over $1 trillion market in India. And we find that the urban middle class Indian woman is going through a very dramatic change, where earlier if she had discretionary income, she was not prioritizing herself. She was prioritizing her husband, her children, her in-laws, right? And today she's saying, listen, if I'm not happy, I'm not healthy, and I'm not fit, then my family isn't either, right? And so Enamor, came out of that sort of nuanced thesis. And we do a lot of our deals that we end up doing are with, let's say, small investment bankers, proprietary deals, but also small investment bankers, one-man shops. This was a small investment banker. This was one individual who actually did not-for-profit work with the promoter on the weekends.
Okay.
And so we connected with him and said, this is a company that we really are excited about. We know that you have a good relationship with this promoter. Please introduce us and help us get in. And so that's how we met Sumir, and that's how we got introduced to Enamor.
Okay.
And what was very interesting about Enamor was, we said, when we got into the company, we said, listen, the product is amazing, the management team is fantastic, but there was a slight dissonance in terms of the brand and what they stood for.
Yeah.
So when we invested, the brand was transform yourself. And we said, listen, all the work that we are doing is suggesting that women feel great about themselves. So we don't need to transform ourselves, right? And the board was very open. So it was a board run process. We hired a consultant to go interview women in urban cities, in tier 2 cities. And they came back and they just showed us a video in the board meeting, and it was amazing. It was all these women who said, I'm feeling great about my body, right? And so we actually helped pivot the brand to Fabulous as I Am.
Oh.
And so this was a very, very interesting sort of story and something that came out of Enamor.
Yeah.
Of course, it was a matter of time before they did very well. They grew, and then in 2019 there was an opportunity that arose to sell the company to Advent.
But tell me, I mean, you've evaluated both men and women. Like you said that women are more conservative in terms of both pitching and putting themselves out there. But what are some of the other differences that you've observed, and how have you seen women change also with time after your support or any other investor or their mentor support?
So I think, if I'm seeing a woman in a pitch, she usually tells me all the negatives about the business. And again, I'm generalizing, but
Yeah.
but if it's a man, I usually ask him what can go terribly wrong, what keeps him up at night. And with a woman, I usually ask her, okay, that's the base case, tell me the best case. Right? What can go really right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
And I feel just getting that support and being asked those questions not only at the time of investing but even in
Yeah.
the board meetings, I think makes a big difference to women.
You said that US had both good and bad. I mean, everything has
Yeah.
two sides to
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
But a lot of people don't speak about bad things as much. But
Yeah.
I'd like to know from you, what were some of the not so good things in the
US?
US and both in India in terms
I mean,
of
the US
culture?
in general, of course, like I said, it's very warm, it's very open, tends to be a little bit transactional, right? In nature.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the bit that's not so great, right? Slightly less relationship oriented and more transactional. Whereas we are very relationship oriented, and I think
Yeah.
that's what's really actually helped us succeed. We've got a wonderful relationship with every single one of our promoters. I mean, touchwood, all our investors.
Yeah.
The team has, I mean, I've had people who've joined me as summer interns and have just grown through the ranks, and
Okay.
the average tenure in India all to 6.5 years. So across, because of that touch
Yeah.
of relationship orientation, it's very long term in nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people who think that there's a lot of brain drain happening in the country, they should hear this, because India is very much relationship oriented and
It
people
is.
don't know about
Yes,
it as
absolutely.
much. Cool. We'll quickly do the rapid fire round.
Okay.
Which sectors are you bullish on for the coming year 2024 and 2025? Where will you see the most activity happening, and where India alternatives you see investing
Very
in?
bullish on all our investment themes of women-oriented consumption, healthcare, tech.
How did the name India Alt come in? I know it has a direct meaning to it, but how did you think about it when you were brainstorming on what the name of my fund could be?
We want the name India there because we're going to be investing only in India, and so of course India alternatives because the alternative asset class,
yeah.
right? And then if you look at our logo, it's an I alpha,
Yeah.
and if you look at it very closely, it's a blue logo, but it has a little dot on top of the I, and this was what the IT intern told me, which I thought was fascinating, and he said, let's do this as a different color to show a bindi for women.
Nice.
So it's actually a deep pink dot on top of the I, if you look at it very carefully.
Yeah. What's the best and the worst piece of advice that you've gotten? I know worst is a very strong word, but not so good piece of advice. Let me put it that way.
I think follow your passion is a very
Yeah.
overrated piece of advice.
Huh.
Most youngsters have no clue what their passion is. And I
the
think one
best
of the best piece of advice is something I said earlier. Think about how this decision will make you feel 10 years from
Yeah.
now. And I think that's one of literally the best decisions,
And who gave
best
this to you?
piece of advice. I think my parents always said this.
But are you
Yeah.
into reading books?
Yeah, very much. Very much.
Which is one of your favorite reads?
So I'm actually reading a bunch of books right now, but one of the things that I'm, find very interesting is this book called The Mind-Gut Connection. Have you heard of it?
No.
Okay, so it is just about how nutrition and plays a very important role in how your gut and your mind are connected.
Okay.
And so how you eat has a very direct impact on actually your mental health.
And if I were to ask you that what defines Shivani,
Yeah.
like what is that one trait, what would it be?
I think I like to have a lot of fun and I want to feel a lot of joy in what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Right. So I think just that feeling of having fun, performing, but not losing that sense of that sense of joy and let's say
Yeah.
that inner child, right? Yeah.
Because our show is about wiping out the norm.
Yes.
Its title is that. I'd like to ask you an instance where you think you have wiped out the norm.
Yeah.
In a specific instance, if you could explain that through your company or in your individual life.
Yeah. I think again, just like being one of the few women-founded GPs with local institutions, I think pioneering the whole domestic ecosystem
Yeah.
in the country, getting the local ecosystem convinced about private equity in the early
Yeah.
days. That wasn't the norm. A woman starting a private equity fund in 2011
Yeah.
was not the norm. So I think I'm finding it hard to think of ways in which I followed the norm.
But did you always know that you would want to start something of your own when you started out in your career?
You know, it's
or
very
was it a natural
interesting you
shift?
asked this. I always thought that it was a natural shift
Yeah.
until the other day when I stumbled upon my essays for Wharton.
Huh.
And I was so surprised that I had written that I want to go back to India and start a private equity fund
My God.
and do a lot of stuff for women.
Okay.
And this was surprising to me also.
Yeah.
So maybe it was somewhere there at the back of my mind,
yeah.
and you know, it seems very natural, but maybe it is there at the back of your mind to do.
Great, Shivani. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing your stories.
Yeah, wonderful
Some
to
of
be
them
here,
were so
Radhika.
heartwarming.
Wonderful to be here. Really enjoyed it, and wish you all the very, very best in
Thank
this
you.
and all your other endeavors.